Welcome, wherever you are, whether your day has been long or your night has just begun. This is your invitation to step gently into the past. Tonight we travel back to the ancient Roman world, but not the one you may have seen in textbooks or stone monuments. This journey won't be led by emperors or generals. It will unfold in kitchens, hallways, training yards, and forgotten corners of empire. You won't find glory here. You'll find labor, repetition, rules, and silence. You'll find people, millions of them, living unrecorded lives under the weight of an empire they upheld but never truly belonged to. In ancient Rome, slavery wasn't hidden in shadows. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, out in the open, in nearly every household, market, and institution. And it came in many forms, from the chained field worker under the sun to the highly educated Greek tutor whispering philosophy in a senator's home. But most were somewhere in between, invisible and indispensable. So now, as the room grows quiet and your body settles, imagine yourself walking down a shaded Roman street. The heat of the day lingers on the stone, but the evening breeze begins to stir. You pass tiled walls, faint voices behind open courtyards, and the scent of oil and ash carried from unseen kitchens. We begin not in the arena or the battlefield, but in the quiet rituals of someone you'll never read about in a scroll or inscription, a Roman household slave. Let us drift now into the inner workings of a Roman domus, a private home. Not one of the grand palaces of emperors, but a modest yet respectable residence belonging to a wealthy citizen. Perhaps a retired military officer or a minor senator. Someone who has enough to own several slaves, but not enough to treat them as anything other than tools. Imagine yourself as one of those tools. You are servus, a slave of the household. You might be in your teens or older. Your past is unclear even to you. You may have been born into slavery or sold into it, or captured in a war long forgotten by those who waged it. But today, none of that matters. You wake before sunrise because your duties don't begin, they resume. There is no bedroom of your own. You sleep where you can, in the atrium if it's warm, near the kitchen if it's cold, on straw, with a thin wool blanket if you're lucky. You rise when your body is still heavy with sleep, because lateness is not forgiven. Your first task of the day, preparing water. The Romans did not have taps, and the home's impluvium, the shallow pool collecting rainwater from the roof, can only do so much. You fetch water from public fountains or cisterns. The amphorae are heavy. You must carry them carefully. The broken jars are deducted from your master's patience. Then you clean, always cleaning, sweeping dust that returns with every step, rinsing dishes that others dirtied, polishing bronze that barely glints through the soot. There's a constant film of oil in the air, from lamps, food, and skin. Your hands become accustomed to its touch. Your fingernails, never clean. Some days you're in the culina, the cramped and smoky kitchen, preparing simple meals. Not for yourself, you eat what's left, later if at all, but for the household. If your mistress desires fish today, and fish is not already in the pantry, it becomes your job to find it. The market is busy, the stalls loud, and haggling is not your gift. But if the fish is too small or too dry, you'll be blamed. If your master hosts guests you serve, you must stand behind him silently while he reclines, watch for his nod, and refill his cup without spilling. You'll hear conversations of land disputes or gossip about provincial politics. None of it concerns you, yet if you listen too closely or speak out of turn, you're reminded swiftly of your place. Your daily life is a test of invisibility, but invisibility does not mean safety. In fact, the opposite. You must be attentive, invisible, and perfect. A dropped tray, a misremembered instruction, even a poorly timed glance can bring punishment. Punishment is not always violent, but it is always humiliating. You may be reassigned to outdoor latrine cleaning, or paraded with a sign around your neck, or made to sleep in the storeroom for a week. Others fare worse. The law offers little protection. A master who kills his slave must only replace the property, unless it's in public. And even then, the concern is for order, not mercy. Still, there are moments, quiet ones, where the rhythm of the household offers a kind of strange, passive peace. In the afternoons, if all tasks are complete, you may sit in the kitchen and shell legumes. The same repetitive motion again and again. Fingers split open pods, reveal pale seeds, and cast away the husks. It is here in silence that you sometimes speak with another slave. Perhaps an older woman who remembers Greece, or a boy who sings quietly under his breath. You don't speak of freedom, that is dangerous. But you speak of other things, of birds nesting in the wall, or how the neighbor's child cried all night, or how the bread smelled good today for once. Some slaves find small privileges. If you're educated, you might be made a tutor, teaching the children Latin or Greek. This is better, cleaner, and safer. If you can write, you may become a household clerk. But these roles are rare and coveted. You have to prove yourself or be lucky, and even then you are still property. Trusted property perhaps, but property nonetheless. And so the days stretch, long and uneventful. Your calendar is marked not by holidays, but by routines. Laundry day, bath day, feast day, where you serve, never eat. At night, if the master's household sleeps peacefully, you may find a corner to curl into. The oil lamp flickers low. The stone beneath you holds the day's heat. You wrap yourself in quiet and try to rest, because soon it will begin again. Now that we've left behind the quiet, exhausting cycles of a Roman household, let us step outside to the arena. Not as a spectator on the shaded stone benches, not as a merchant selling dates and sweet wine at the gates, but as a man shackled at the wrist, standing in a sun-bleached courtyard, waiting to be trained to die. Imagine yourself in Capua. It is the early 70s BCE. The air is heavy with heat, and the streets hum with voices preparing for another set of games. You are inside a gladiator school, a ludus. The walls are high, not to keep intruders out, but to keep fighters in. Among them walks Spartacus. His name echoes through centuries, but here he is simply another man with calloused hands and no choices left. Originally from Thrace, in what is now southeastern Europe, Spartacus may have once fought as a Roman auxiliary soldier before being enslaved. Accounts differ. Some say he deserted. Others suggest he was captured in war. But what matters is where he is now, under guard in chains, in a system that turns people into spectacle. He is strong, intelligent, and observant. These traits do not go unnoticed. He is chosen for gladiatorial training. That may sound like a privilege. It is not. In the ludus, the days are strict. You rise early. You eat barley gruel, thick and filling, meant to build mass. You train in sand pits under the eye of the lanista, the master of the school. Wood swords first, to learn control. Then heavier weapons, real weight, real risk. You spar not for skill alone, but for timing, for rhythm, for survival. There is a hierarchy here, even among the condemned. Veteran fighters, called doctores, drill new recruits mercilessly. You are given a gladiator class, Mamilio if you are tall and broad, Braics if you are quick and agile. Spartacus perhaps is somewhere between. Fighting is not constant, but fear is. Even in rest, you hear rumors of who died in the last match, whose wounds festered overnight, who displeased the lanista and was sold off. Spartacus waits, he watches, and then he acts. In the spring of 73 BCE, Spartacus and roughly 70 others escape. The exact details are hazy. Some say they seized kitchen knives, overpowered guards, and fled into the countryside. What is clear is that this was not a lone act of desperation. It was organized, swift, and bold. They stole proper weapons soon after, gladius swords and shields from traveling wagons, and retreated to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. At first, the Roman authorities are dismissive. They send a small force to deal with what they see as a band of runaway criminals. That underestimation proves costly. Spartacus and his followers outmaneuver them, famously using vines to rappel down the steep side of the mountain, flanking the soldiers unexpectedly. What began as a flight becomes something else. As news spreads, more slaves join, the numbers swell. Not just gladiators now, but shepherds, field workers, miners, men who have nothing left to lose. Spartacus does not crown himself king. He doesn't proclaim divine rule, but he leads, he strategizes. He insists on discipline among his growing army. His co-leaders, Crixus and Oenomaus, add strength, especially among the Gauls and Germans. Over the next 2 years, Rome becomes increasingly concerned. More legions are sent. Some suffer humiliating defeats. Spartacus moves with surprising speed, southward then northward, always staying one step ahead. At one point, he may have considered crossing the Alps to escape entirely. But whether from loyalty to those still enslaved in Italy, or the impossibility of leading such a large force through hostile terrain, he turns back. Eventually, the full weight of Rome descends. The general Crassus is given command. He is ruthless, methodical. He traps the rebel army in the south. Spartacus fights to break through. Battles are fierce, losses mount. In 71 BCE, the final clash takes place in Lucania. Spartacus charges, sword in hand, aiming for Crassus himself. It is said he nearly reaches him before he is surrounded. His body is never found. Afterward, Rome makes a brutal example of the rebellion's survivors. 6,000 men are crucified along the Appian Way, lining the road from Capua to Rome like silent warnings. But the story does not vanish. Spartacus becomes a symbol, not in his own time, where the upper classes dismissed him as a violent rebel, but in the centuries that followed. In art, literature, and modern revolutions, he becomes the image of resistance against oppression. Yet here, in this moment, we remember him not as a myth, not as an icon, but as a man in chains who dared to say no. A man who, for a brief and burning moment, reminded an empire that those it called property still had voices and wills and dreams of freedom. Now let us leave behind the heart of Italy and travel far to the outer rim of the Roman world. Past the olive groves, the bustling forums, and the warm Mediterranean coasts, we journey north to the edge of the empire, to Britannia. It is windswept here, cold even in summer. The soil is heavy and dark with moisture. The skies are a muted grey most days, low and watchful. And yet here too Rome has left its mark. Nestled just south of what will later become Hadrian's Wall, we arrive at Vindolanda, a Roman fort occupied in cycles from the late 1st century CE onward. It is not grand, it is practical. Timber barracks, supply depots, a small village huddled nearby for families and traders. But what makes Vindolanda remarkable is not its military significance. It is what the earth beneath it preserved. You see, the ground here is rich in clay and water, anaerobic, dense, perfect for preservation. For nearly 2 millennia, secrets lay buried in the mud. Until the 1970s, when archaeologists began to uncover something unexpected. Writing tablets, hundreds of them, thin palm-sized slices of wood inked with letters and notes. They are the oldest surviving handwritten documents in Britain, and they are not proclamations or battle orders. They are fragments of life. Let us pause now and listen to their voices. One letter is from a woman named Claudia Severa. She writes to her friend, Sulpicia Lepidina, the wife of the camp commander. The ink is delicate, flowing. The message, a birthday party invitation. I shall be expecting you, sister. Farewell, my sister, my dearest soul. It is affectionate, warm, and entirely ordinary. Another tablet is a shopping list. Requests for socks, sandals, and undergarments. Imagine that. Even in the cold northern frontier of Rome, soldiers worried about chilly feet and worn-out clothes. There are military duty rosters too, carefully noting who was assigned to the gates, who cleaned the stables, who escorted messengers. Each name scratched in with purpose and complaints. One soldier grumbles about the state of the roads. Another accuses someone of stealing grain. The handwriting grows tighter, angrier. These letters were never meant to last, and yet preserved by chance they survived. Together they form a chorus, not of emperors or generals, but of ordinary people. Imagine living here. You wake before dawn, breath clouding in the morning chill. The barrack floor is damp. You pull on your tunic still stiff from yesterday's rain. Breakfast is simple, barley porridge, a piece of cheese if you're lucky. You report to your centurion, are handed your post, and head to the watchtower. There is no glamour in this posting. You are far from Rome, far from home. The Britons beyond the wall are restless. Supplies arrive slowly, and in winter, the mud never dries. But in the quiet moments, there is companionship. Letters from wives, small jokes with fellow soldiers, the comfort of routine. You sit in the Principia, the headquarters, and read a scribbled note from someone you miss. A reminder that you are remembered. The Vindolanda tablets are not stories told about the Roman world. They are the Roman world, whispering to us across time. One tablet even includes an inventory of weapons: 10 spears, 15 javelins, 5 swords, 3 bows, and 70 arrows. Another lists beer shipments. Yes, beer. Wine may have been preferred in the south, but up here, locals brewed beer. The Romans adapted. They always did. There's something deeply human in all of this. Imagine you are a soldier posted far from your homeland. You trudge through muck, worry about weather, scratch a quick note to your brother asking for more socks. And 2,000 years later, someone reads it by lamplight in a museum. These are not great declarations, not speeches carved in stone, but they are real, they are quiet, and they remind us that history is not made only in moments of grandeur. It lives in ink stains, muddy boots, and the hope that someone will write back. Now, as our journey through Rome draws toward its end, we turn our gaze from the muddy frontiers and worn sandals of legionnaires to the gleaming atriums of the Roman elite. Let us step quietly into the domus of a Roman patrician, a member of the ruling class, shielded by wealth, wrapped in silk and served by dozens of unseen hands. Imagine the doors parting for you, not wooden or simple, but bronze inlaid and heavy. Beyond them, the entrance hall gleams with imported marble. The floors shimmer in tesserae, tiny mosaic tiles arranged into grand scenes, sea gods, hunting stags, heroes of myth, each one a frozen performance. The walls are painted in rich hues, deep Pompeian red, ochre yellow, cobalt blue. On them, slender gods recline in painted leisure. Everything here whispers of control, order, and taste. But behind the beauty lies complexity and sometimes rot. A daily life of excess and pretense. Life for a Roman patrician was filled with ceremony, obligation, and subtle competition. Your wealth had to be seen, tasted, and performed. Breakfast might be a simple affair, but the midday meal, prandial, and especially the evening cena, could stretch for hours. Picture yourself reclining, propped on one elbow, surrounded by cushions embroidered in Egyptian thread. Slaves move about silently, bearing platters of flamingo tongues, dormice soaked in honey, pickled sea urchins. But not all of this was truly enjoyed. Often food was displayed more for prestige than pleasure. Recipes grew increasingly absurd, designed to dazzle guests or outshine a rival host. The hosts themselves lived in an odd balance, unchallenged in status, yet constantly wary of how they were perceived. Who you invited to your dinner mattered, who declined an invitation could cause scandal. Even leisure became a form of labor. Wealthy Romans spent their mornings receiving clientes, poorer citizens who offered political loyalty in exchange for small favors or coin. The patronus would stand in the atrium, listening to endless petitions, smiling politely, weighing every word for advantage. A walk through the hortus, the private garden, could offer respite. Columns circled olive trees, fountains trickled from lion-head spouts, and songbirds darted among laurel shrubs. The scent of crushed thyme lingered on the breeze, but always, behind the curtain, slaves worked, tending the water channels, feeding the peacocks, plucking stray weeds. Even beauty required invisible effort. The politics of luxury. As centuries passed, Roman elites grew wealthier, but also more anxious. By the later empire, wealth was not only a display, but a shield. Inheritance laws grew complex, requiring careful management. Social mobility was limited, but still feared. Imagine sitting in your villa's library, surrounded by scrolls from Alexandria and Athens, yet constantly aware of who might seek to challenge you or replace you. Senators schemed not in whispers, but in carefully worded speeches, loaded with insinuation. Even a simple phrase at a banquet could spark months of rivalry. One misplaced nod, one absent gift, and reputations could falter. Historians of the time began to note a sense of decay. They wrote of indulgent airs, moral softness, too much wine, too little duty. Yet the opulence only grew. Floors of precious porphyry, water clocks that chimed with silver balls, dinners accompanied by poetry, harpists, and the occasional trained parrot reciting Homer. The quiet cost. But with all this, who was truly content? Children were raised by Greek tutors, rarely by their parents. Marriages were often political, friendships transactional, and within these grand homes, loneliness echoed as surely as harp strings. As Roman emperors shifted from civic-minded republicans to decadent autocrats, so too did patrician life lose its roots in virtues, the Roman ideal of discipline and service. The gardens grew more elaborate, the walls more gilded, but beneath the marble cracks formed, and then things changed. The empire strained, borders frayed, grain shipments slowed. A new religion, Christianity, gained ground. The old gods still adorned mosaic floors, but fewer believed in their power. Imagine sitting by a reflecting pool, watching the ripples distort the carved visage of Bacchus. You sip from a silver cup. The wine is good, but your steward mentions a delay in shipments from Hispania. Again. Your children speak Greek more fluently than Latin. Your cousin has sold their villa in Campania, moved east to Constantinople, and somewhere far beyond the gates of Rome, soldiers fight on muddy roads. You write a letter to an old friend. You speak of theatre, of gardens, of olives this year being bitter. You do not mention your worry. That is the quiet tragedy of the Roman elite. Not that they lived in wealth, but that they did so increasingly in a world they could not sustain. flat brush. It is dull work, repetitive. You move your arm in circles, careful not to splash the wrong person. By late afternoon, the light changes. Bathers leave in clusters, toweling off slowly, their skin flushed pink from the steam. Laughter lingers in the atrium. You gather the used towels, place sandals back at the entrance, and help a nobleman's wife tie her sandals without speaking. The furnace, now burning low, gives its last warm breath. Ash drifts quietly in the hypocaust like pale snow. You rake it into buckets, your hands sore but steady. And then, slowly, finally, the thermi begin to empty. The silence that follows is not peaceful exactly, but it is yours. You walk home alone, your feet sore from standing on marble all day. Your back aches in the good, dull way that means you did not anger anyone today. You carry the day with you in the scent of oil on your skin, in the black smudge beneath your fingernails, and in the quiet ache behind your eyes. This is not the life of statues and scrolls, not the history they write poems about, but it was a life lived day after day, and it mattered to someone, even if only to you. The sun is not yet harsh, but the sky over Rome has already turned its familiar pale gold. You rise before the noise starts, not because you choose to, but because you must. You work at the Amphitheatrum Flavium, the great Colosseum, but not as a gladiator, nor a vendor. You're something in between, a backstage presence, a cleaner, a hauler, a sweeper, a person whose name no one remembers, but whose work everyone sees. Your first duty is to walk the perimeter. The stone feels cold underfoot even in summer, and dew collects in the crevices of the outer arches. You pause briefly near a bronze statue, once gleaming, now dulled by years of dust, and begin gathering the scraps left from the previous day's spectacle. You do not dwell on what they were. Strips of cloth, a sandal, a broken wooden plate, occasionally something more troubling, a discarded belt or dried smears on stone. But your hands are practiced and your mind remains still. You were told long ago, do not ask questions. The Colosseum is for games, but also for forgetting. The scent of the place is a heavy mixture. Damp dust from stone bleachers, the iron tang of old blood, the sourness of leftover garum spilled on bread crusts. You sweep in slow arcs. The broom is handmade, and it leaves fine trails of hay behind with each motion. No one cares, so long as the debris disappears. As you work, the early vendors arrive, some with trays of baked nuts, others with baskets of olives soaked in vinegar. One man always arrives late, carrying amphorae of watered wine on a wooden yoke. You nod to him, though he doesn't nod back. Your presence makes people uneasy. You're not paid to be seen. Later in the morning, the officials will arrive. The magistrates, the editors, the men who fund the games for public favor. But for now, it's just you and the stone and the distant cooing of birds circling the upper arches, waiting for crumbs. Before the first spectators are let in, you help unroll the canvas awning. The velarium, it's immense. The ropes are rough and burn your hands if you're not careful. The awning must shade the elite seats, the ones near the pulvinar, where senators sit with expressions carved from marble. You pause briefly to catch your breath under the shadow of the upper tier. From here, the arena seems impossibly wide, a dusty ellipse meant to entertain thousands. You think of it like a mouth, open, always hungry, not for food, but for noise, for clapping, for distraction. The first crowds begin to file in. Their sandals slap against stone. They murmur, bargain, complain about seating. Some carry cushions, some wear garlands, hoping to catch the attention of someone more important. You slip into the side corridors, where you're supposed to stay, unseen but always nearby. By midday, the sun is overhead. The games begin, not with grandeur but with delay. A flutist plays a repetitive tune. A few animal handlers lead in goats, dogs, or the occasional exotic bird, their plumage twitching with unease. These early acts are meant to amuse, to warm the crowd. You stay beneath the seats where it's cooler, sweeping discarded fig leaves and spilled grain into piles with your feet. Occasionally, you're called to carry buckets of sand. The arena floor must stay clean, at least until it can't. You dump it where told and walk away. You do not watch the games. You've learned not to. You've learned that the cheers from above and the silence below are two different worlds. One of indulgence, the other of necessity. Later, you refill water jars for the gladiators. You don't speak to them. Some are quiet, some hum low songs to themselves. One is missing a thumb. Another has a scar across his jaw so deep you can almost see the muscle beneath. You look away. By late afternoon, the amphitheater is sticky with sound. The air smells of sweat and old wine. The games are louder now. The audience is louder still. But the tasks remain the same. Carry, scrub, wait, carry again. You pour water into a trough where a lion once stood hours earlier. There are red stains on the edge of the wood. You do not ask questions. As the games wind down, the mood softens. The elite leave first, their cloaks perfumed, their sandals barely scuffed by the marble steps. Vendors pack up slowly, counting coins. You sweep again, slower now, careful not to miss the hidden corners. You wipe benches with a damp cloth. You unroll the rope to close the outer gates. Eventually, it grows quiet. The Colosseum empties. What remains is the echo of noise that never truly dies, and the weight of the day held in your bones. You do not cheer, you do not clap, but the city needed a show, and you helped give it one. Then, as always, you disappear into the evening crowds, unnoticed, unspeaking, and entirely necessary. Imagine yourself in the soft hush of a Roman side street. It's late afternoon. The city is quieter now, just the rhythmic clatter of wooden cartwheels on stone and the distant bark of a dog. You're sitting outside a modest insula, a crumbling apartment building housing dozens of families, each behind thin walls and thinner patience. You live on the third floor, far from the fountains and villas of Rome's rich. Your kitchen is a corner with a brazier, a few pottery jars, and an oil lamp. There's no refrigerator, no printed cookbook. There's no such thing as dinner plans. What you eat depends on what you could afford this morning at the market or what was left. Breakfast, if there is one, is light. Romans call it ientaculum. For you, it's a piece of yesterday's bread, dipped in diluted wine or olive oil, if you're lucky. Maybe a few wrinkled figs or olives from a clay jar. There is no indulgence, only routine. Food is fuel, not comfort. As midday approaches, you eat again. Prandium. The word sounds more satisfying than the meal. It might be a wedge of sheep's cheese, still holding the scent of its straw wrapping. Perhaps a scattering of cold beans or boiled lentils, their skins splitting gently between your fingers. If there's meat, it's likely dried, preserved, with salt long ago and chewed slowly with teeth worn down by years of coarse bread. Still, you savor it. Not because it tastes extraordinary, but because it fills you, and you'll need that to carry you through another day of hauling water or scrubbing marble floors in someone else's home. Dinner, the cena, is where the divide between Rome's rich and poor becomes impossible to ignore. Your version is simple, a thin stew called pulse, made from emmer wheat or barley, boiled until thick, maybe seasoned with onion, garlic, or bits of leek. Sometimes dried herbs, occasionally a splash of garum, the famous fermented fish sauce, sharp and salty enough to bring forgotten bread back to life. There are no desserts. Perhaps an apple, maybe a handful of walnuts cracked open with a stone. You rinse your fingers in a chipped bowl of water and wipe them on a cloth used more times than you can count. Then you sleep and begin again. Now imagine you were born into luxury instead, a villa on the Palatine Hill, white marble, shaded courtyards, a team of servants whose only duty is to keep your hands clean and your plate full. Your breakfast is brought to you. A tray with pastries sweetened with honey, a bowl of dates from Syria, spiced wine, warm and scented with cinnamon and peppercorn. You eat reclining, as the rich do, even when no one is watching. Dinner becomes theater. The Roman elite do not. Simply eat, they display their status in courses. There is peacock, its feathers used for table decoration. Dormice, stuffed with herbs and dipped in honey. Eels, swimming in porcelain basins moments before being cooked. Everything is flavored. With garum, the same fish sauce, but aged longer, more refined. They call it liquamen, and it flows like gold. But these are not daily meals. They are statements. Even the wealthy eat simply when no one's watching. Boiled eggs, cold asparagus, lentils with vinegar and mint. Across the empire, the food changes. In Egypt, there is more fish, more fava beans, more coriander. In Gaul, wild mushrooms and thick stews made with goose fat. On the frontier in Britannia, soldiers eat hardtack, barley porridge, and whatever the wind allows to grow. The remarkable thing isn't the extravagance of the few, it's the endurance of the many. The quiet rhythm of meals built from scraps, fed by habit, not hunger. Roman cuisine, in its realist form, wasn't recipes or parties or banquets. It was repetition. It was survival. And tonight, in this soft retelling, it becomes memory. Imagine picking up a piece of wood, no larger than your hand, rough around the edges and stained from time. But instead of firewood, it carries words, faded ink from a hand long gone. Not poetry, not lore, just the small things people forget. They're saying, a shopping list, a birthday invitation, a complaint about socks. You're at Vindolanda, a Roman fort near what would become Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain. Cold winds sweep across the landscape, even in spring. Centuries ago, soldiers from warmer lands stood guard here, wrapped in cloaks that barely kept out the damp. They wrote home, they wrote to each other, and they wrote things they never imagined anyone else would read. These are the Vindolanda tablets, preserved by mud and time. Not grand inscriptions meant for marble walls, but soft voices from the margins of empire. One man, a soldier, scribbles to a friend about socks. He writes plainly, "Send more socks. I have only one pair." You can almost feel the chill in his bones, the scratch of wool still damp from yesterday's march. There's no drama in his words, only need. Another letter is from a commanding officer's wife, a woman named Claudia Severa, inviting a friend to her birthday party. "I shall expect you, sister," she writes. The script is elegant, deliberate. It's one of the earliest known examples of female handwriting in Latin. Her words are both affectionate and formal, a Roman blend of sentiment and decorum. Others write about grain deliveries, sword repairs, or their distaste for fellow soldiers. There are notes requesting leave, lists of who owes what to whom, and a few barely decipherable scribbles, likely made by bored teenagers. These letters are small windows. Together, they paint a different Rome, not one of emperors and triumphs, but of homesick men, careful wives, and ordinary complaints. They didn't intend to leave a legacy. They were simply living. Imagine now a legionary sitting by firelight, ink-stained fingers holding a thin stylus. The tablet rests on his knee. He listens to the wind rattle the wooden shutters. He scratches out a line, crosses it out, tries again. These weren't speeches. They were murmurs. Even their complaints are tender in hindsight. The beer here is no good. The roads are impassable. I was given bad boots, simple words, but full of presence. You can almost hear the shuffle of sandals on stone, the creak of leather armor, the muttered Latin between frost-bitten breaths. We often think of ancient Rome in marble and gold, but here, in this quiet pile of mud-preserved tablets, we find something more intimate. The things people didn't mean to preserve are sometimes the most revealing, and though they're silent now, these letters still whisper. While most Romans lived with very little, in cramped insulae or dusty outposts, the patricians, the upper class, lived differently, much differently. Picture it, a villa tucked behind thick stone walls. You pass through a shaded entryway into the atrium, where sunlight drips through an open roof, pooling in the shallow basin below, designed to catch rainwater and the occasional breeze. The floors are tiled in tiny mosaics, some chipped from years of footsteps, but still vivid, depicting sea monsters, gods, and the occasional mythological pun. Every inch curated, yet slowly fraying at the edges. Life in such a house moves at a different rhythm. Servants pad softly through corridors, bearing fruit on trays or incense in small terracotta burners. You might hear the clink of goblets or the low murmur of voices from a dining room where guests recline on couches rather than sit. Meals are long, conversation longer. There's time for philosophy, for gossip, for complaining about the Senate. Behind this elegance lies a curious sort of decay. Wealth buys leisure, but also distance from labor, and sometimes from purpose. Some patricians micromanaged their estates, others floated in a haze of luxury and self-indulgence. They attended banquets that stretched into the night, where wine flowed and courses came by the dozen. They debated abstract philosophy while slaves trimmed their beards and peeled their grapes. They composed verses. They commissioned statues of themselves. They plotted subtly to edge their way into higher favor. Even their gardens were performances. Manicured lawns surrounded by painted porticos, designed more to impress visitors than to be enjoyed. Hedges sculpted into geometric shapes, tiny fountains murmuring into marble basins, not wild or fragrant but orderly, like nature tamed for status. At times, their wealth could feel like a hollow theater. Grand feasts were followed by indigestion and guilt. Lavish clothing concealed anxieties over status and favor, and the constant shadow of political turbulence, a wrong word at a dinner party, an unlucky alliance, could unmake fortunes overnight. Women in these households held complex roles. Some, like Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi brothers, were remembered for their intellect and moral clarity. Others navigated a life of decorum, influence and constraint, always careful, always watched. They managed homes, arranged marriages, and wrote letters that balanced sincerity with social performance. There's something quietly tragic in how much of their life was curated, designed to be seen, remembered and preserved, but often forgotten all the same. Because even in luxury, the patricians were not immune to the slow erosion of time. Mosaics faded, gardens overgrew, statues crumbled, and the names once spoken with reverence in candlelit salons eventually faded from the stone. Now we walk through the ruins. We see tiled floors and painted walls still clinging to color. We admire the symmetry, the scale. But what we're really looking at is the ghost of ambition. A home built not just for comfort, but for a kind of permanence that never quite came. In the end, the grand Roman villa was as impermanent as the grain rations that fed the poor. One just took longer to fade. While most Romans lived with very little, in cramped insulae or dusty outposts, the patricians, the upper class, lived differently, much differently. Picture it. A villa tucked behind thick stone walls. You pass through a shaded entryway into the atrium, where sunlight drips through an open roof, pooling in the shallow basin below, designed to catch rainwater and the occasional breeze. The floors are tiled in tiny mosaics, some chipped from years of footsteps, but still vivid, depicting sea monsters, gods, and the occasional mythological pun. Every inch curated, yet slowly fraying at the edges. Life in such a house moves at a different rhythm. Servants pad softly through corridors, bearing fruit on trays or incense in small terracotta burners. You might hear the clink of goblets or the low murmur of voices from a dining room where guests recline on couches rather than sit. Meals are long, conversation longer. There's time for philosophy, for gossip, for complaining about the Senate. Behind this elegance lies a curious sort of decay. Wealth buys leisure, but also distance from labor, and sometimes from purpose. Some patricians micromanaged their estates, others floated in a haze of luxury and self-indulgence. They attended banquets that stretched into the night, where wine flowed and courses came by the dozen. They debated abstract philosophy while slaves trimmed their beards and peeled their grapes. They composed verses. They commissioned statues of themselves. They plotted subtly to edge their way into higher favor. Even their gardens were performances. Manicured lawns surrounded by painted porticos, designed more to impress visitors than to be enjoyed. Hedges sculpted into geometric shapes, tiny fountains murmuring into marble basins, not wild or fragrant but orderly, like nature tamed for status. At times, their wealth could feel like a hollow theater. Grand feasts were followed by indigestion and guilt. Lavish clothing concealed anxieties over status and favor, and the constant shadow of political turbulence, a wrong word at a dinner party, an unlucky alliance, could unmake fortunes overnight. Women in these households held complex roles. Some, like Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi brothers, were remembered for their intellect and moral clarity. Others navigated a life of decorum, influence and constraint, always careful, always watched. They managed homes, arranged marriages, and wrote letters that balanced sincerity with social performance. There's something quietly tragic in how much of their life was curated, designed to be seen, remembered and preserved, but often forgotten all the same. Because even in luxury, the patricians were not immune to the slow erosion of time. Mosaics faded, gardens overgrew, statues crumbled, and the names once spoken with reverence in candlelit salons eventually faded from the stone. Now we walk through the ruins. We see tiled floors and painted walls still clinging to color. We admire the symmetry, the scale. But what we're really looking at is the ghost of ambition. A home built not just for comfort, but for a kind of permanence that never quite came. In the end, the grand Roman villa was as impermanent as the grain rations that fed the poor. One just took longer to fade.